right, long overdue update incoming. Today I'm going to do a deep dive into all the changes I've been making to my Dungeon Crawl board game for final release. So this video is going to be tedious and boring, and I don't recommend watching it unless you just happen to be into the process of game design. This channel has never really been anything more than a creative journal, and it's going to be nothing but a creative journal today in all its glory. So I'm going to start just by reiterating that after beta testing, I came up with 12 pages of revisions that I wanted to make to the game. Now, these are all notes that I collected from the beta testers, along with massive amounts of notes that I collected myself from all the beta testing I did. And these changes touch every single mechanic and asset in the game. So it's a fairly huge refactor that I'm engaged in right now. And I've spent the last month tackling this 12-page change set. I have completely refactored and redistributed all of the counters in the game. So for monsters, the monster groups used to have various numbers of monsters in each group. There used to be 8 cultists and 5 skeleton warriors and 6 zombies. Now, every single monster group comes with exactly 6 monster counters. It just simplifies group monster dynamics, just makes it a lot cleaner. I've also been working on behaviors for the warning chits, and I've been working on iconography for that. You execute all the warning actions, so every chanting counter will move 1 space toward a white diamond, and map tiles now have white diamonds and black diamonds on some of the tiles, and those are just easy waypoints for monster AI. And the black diamonds usually indicate moving further into a dungeon, and the white diamonds usually indicate moving toward the entrance. So like the entrance tile of each tile set is going to have a white diamond, and some of the large chambers like the inner sanctum will have a white diamond, whereas terminus tiles in some of the tile sets will have black diamonds. Not all warning types have behaviors. And then the singleton monsters have various behaviors as well, like the megapede and the viper. They both move 2 spaces toward the nearest black diamond. The rumble has a little timer icon on it, which means it gets placed on the stat tracker. The bubbles has this little icon indicating that it becomes alert if any hero is adjacent or diagonally adjacent to it. And then down here, dread will cause 1 sanity or 1 will damage to any hero in the same map section. Dread moves 1 space toward the nearest hero. The buzzing flies move 1 space toward the nearest hero. And now I've developed a nice little library of like a half a dozen different behaviors that warnings can execute. And I think that'll just breathe more life into the game. I'm also thinking about making the Doomweaver a special monster that comes in its own expansion. I like the idea that the Doomweaver has a bunch of web tokens and complicated behaviors and creates like web tangles throughout a location. So I think I'm going to remove the Doomweaver from the core set and kind of make it like a special expansion. Another huge change that I've made is that the heroes now have 12 starting counters instead of 16. And now each hero starts with all of their starting equipment. So there's no longer choices to make about which items you start with. And the main reason I did this is because there never really were meaningful choices to make about starting equipment. I mean, there were just a lot of items that were not useful at all. Hero progression is going to be tied more to these upgrades that you purchase with experience points. The rare items are not really changing. Power items, lost artifacts, and dark relics are pretty much functioning as they always have. Ingredients are no longer starting equipment for the cleric. Ingredients are now acquired 3 different ways. They can be purchased in the village. They can be gathered in the wilderness expansion, and they can potentially be found maybe like in the cellar of the temple. Any concoction that you can brew with 2 ingredients, now you're capable of brewing at least 2 concoctions if you have, all 5 ingredients. But this is going to be a lot more dynamic, and I think acquiring ingredients is going to be more interesting now. I've refactored all the challenge ratings for the doors, and I eliminated a door, so now there are only 3 doors in the game, and they all have wizard locked backsides. I made the challenge ratings for everything a little lower just because the really high challenge ratings were kind of silly. I don't want a door that nobody can open. Doesn't really make sense. It'll just be frustrating. And then I've completely reconnoitered the discovery chit pool. I now have this final sort of design document for all the chits, and the only thing I really need to do to wrap up all the chit stuff is to get the powers and skills finished and make sure that they work the way they're supposed to work and unlock the kind of equipment they need to unlock. I just need to put like a little more thought into that, but I'm getting closer with it. Other than that, and finalizing the iconography for the warning behaviors and maybe tweaking some of the warning behaviors a little bit, I'm pretty much done with all the counters. Now the hero cards are bigger. I'm using the jumbo 3.5 by 5.5 inch cards now instead of the square 3.5 inch cards. And now I have a stow slot for negligible weight items, and you can hold up to 6 on this. Negligible weight items used to be stored on the stat tracker, and the stat tracker was always a huge mess because of it. And the powers and skills will be placed here. So there's going to be 4 slots for upgrades. I'm also toying with the idea that heroes can start with an upgrade to allow heroes to have some agency over the starting configuration of the hero now that the starting equipment is all sort of predetermined. The stat tracker was always a huge mess. I've made the stat tracker bigger. It's now on a 3.5 by 5.5 inch jumbo card. It still only has 12 slots, but you can see the slots are much bigger now. There's a lot more room for picking up counters. There's a special starting space for the torch. There's a place where you can store your utility chit now, so you don't have to put it on top of the hero art. And then there's also the all-important 0 space on the stat tracker. So when stats reach 0, you can now track the incapacitated state of a hero. It's just a lot cleaner. So yeah, it takes up a little more real estate, which increases the footprint of the game a little bit, but I think in this particular case, it's a worthy trade-off. I think between the new hero card and the new stat tracker, managing heroes is going to be more pleasant, and managing your heroes is kind of a big part of the game. So I want to make that experience less frustrating. And so I've put a lot of thought into how these quest cards work, and the whole reason that I came up with these quest cards to begin with is that spawning monsters and monster warnings was always a huge mess. You'd have to dig through the monster chit stack and find 4 cultists, and then you'd have to reshuffle the stack after you dug out the 4 cultists. It just didn't work. It felt clumsy. Always kind of took me out of the game every time I had to touch the monster stack. And then I thought, well, why not just have a program board, kind of like Magic Realm, but a lot simpler, a lot easier to set up. And now spawning warnings and converting them to monsters is pretty easy. So now when you're setting up scenarios, all you have to do is pull out the scenario card, the quest card, and you just stock it with, you put 1 chanting warning here in this slot, 2 chantings here, 3 chantings here. And the R means that all recycled monsters, all dead cultists are going to get placed on this slot, and you'll always draw from that slot. So this could potentially, become 4 or 5 or even 6 at some point. And here it lists all of the discovery counters, and there's a spot to put the discovery stack. The tentacles, the bubbles are always going to be on every scenario card, because every scenario you could potentially have to deal with tentacles. Like, let's say you explore this map tile, you place it, here's a monster icon, which I've changed the iconography on all the map tiles as well. So you need to place a warning counter here. So all you have to do is do a warning spawn roll, 6, And let's say you've already placed snickering, so this is empty. So you just go to the next one down. Oh, noxious fumes. So you grab noxious fumes off the quest card and you put it right there. Now, if you've already placed all 3 of these, then nothing would happen on a 6. And so this eliminates the need for a threat counter altogether. So you no longer have to track threat levels in this game. The threat level is sort of inherently tracked on the quest cards themselves. So there's not really a global threat level anymore, but there's a threat level associated with each monster type, I think is a better way to look at it. And I think thematically it makes sense because you're kind of, if you keep running into cultists, then the cultists are talking amongst themselves, like, hey, we have intruders. The psycho rats may not really care what the cultists are doing or saying, and vice versa. So I sort of like that each monster group has its own threat level. And then this is the sandbox mode, and the sandbox mode is going to behave a little differently. Instead of hard coding specific monster types in each one of these, it's going to be more procedural. There's going to be group A, group B, and so you can take all your monster groups and you can randomly choose which monster group is group A. And then here, the first time you roll a 5 or a 6, you're going to get a 1 HP singleton monster, and then a 2 HP singleton monster, and then a 3 HP singleton monster. And I think there could be more than one card for sandbox mode. I could also see these columns not being even. I could see this being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So, maybe Forgotten Places is going to be 2-sided, and maybe there's a different configuration, configuration A, configuration B. So all the changes that I've discussed so far basically amounts to a complete rewrite of the rule book, which I'm also working on. And I've been consolidating some of the visual aids in the rule book. And obviously I needed to update all the assets because they all look different now. But I'm really trying to get rid of redundant information in the rule book and streamline it and simplify it. And I'm taking the visual aids and condensing them down, fewer, bigger aids. And I think it's just sort of cleaning and streamlining the rule book quite a bit. And then I'm just now getting into monsters and combat. So I think I have another week to go on the rewrite of the rule book. I think I already mentioned I'm taking a pass at all the map tiles. I'm also redistributing map tiles. So now there's going to be 16 temple tiles, 14 tomb tiles, and only 10 tunnel tiles. And then I'm going to design a new tile that's a connector tile. The sandbox tile set is just going to be the 3 scenario tile sets combined, and they're all going to connect together with these hub tiles. Because the Forgotten Places map tiles were really not that interesting. They were pretty generic and underwhelming compared to the scenario map tiles. So why not just use all the different tile sets that I've spent so much time on and turn them into like one big mega dungeon. I'm also going to be rewriting the monster cards. I just want to clean up and simplify the monster cards. I don't think the warnings are going to be printed on the monster cards anymore because the warnings sort of have a life of their own now. And I think that if anything, there should just be a player aid with the warnings listed on it and like sort of a rehash of the behaviors for each warning. And so the magic user will have a jumbo card that is the spell book. So he will never have to refer to the rule book to get complete definitions for any spell. And I think there will be 10 spells on the front side, and those will be level 1 spells. And there will be 10 more spells on the back side, level 2 spells. So the back side of the card will get unlocked when the magic user levels up. And same thing with concoctions. The concoctions are going to be printed on a jumbo-sized card, and the cleric can just have like the complete definition list for concoctions, or whoever ends up with ingredients, because now ingredients are not tethered to the cleric. Ingredients can be acquired by anybody. You still have to pass a knowledge test to successfully concoct. And I've been working on a 3D Minis add-on for the game. I think in its first incarnation, it will just be a set of STL files that people can download for free and print their own 3D Minis. I'm also going to do a standees add-on so that people can play with standees. This game was always intended to be played with standees, and I always sort of fantasized about having minis for the game. But over time, out of necessity and cost, I simplified the game into a simple counter-based game. But I'm hoping that when version 1 of the game is released, I'll also be able to push out the standees and the 3D minis. I tend to go super low poly with my 3D mini designs just because I'm using a very small scale for my minis. These minis are not going to be compatible with your standard 28 millimeter minis. These are really more like 20 millimeter minis. And the reason I do that is because I'm using a completely different scale for my map tiles than most dungeon crawls use. I'm using 7/8 inch spaces instead of inch or even inch and a quarter. And I'm doing that because I want to decrease the footprint of my game. I want the game to be a more intimate experience. It could be played on a small table because it was originally designed as a solitaire game. So as you see here, we can take a look at this. Gonna remove the raft. So this is like a standard cultist. So here's like your standard Warhammer 40K, which these minis are always huge. Here's the Shadows of Brimstone. This is a standard 28 millimeter figure. This is a Dungeons and Dragons board game hero from the Castle Ravenloft game. This is an old mini from the 1980s. As you can see, back in the 80s, the minis were much, much smaller than they are now, even smaller than like your standard minis. I would say mine are even like smaller than that. And like I said, I'm doing this for size, for footprint, for cost. I mean, you can fit 8 of these into the size of 1 of these. So by scaling this down to half size, you're actually making it 1/8 the size and weight of one of these. All the minis for my game will be able to fit in a small Ziploc baggie. They're cheap to print, they're fast to print. This costs maybe 20 cents to print this. This is 1 gram of filament, and a kilogram of filament costs less than 20 bucks now. So you could basically print 1,000 of these cultists for 20 bucks. I've been playing around with poses for the cultists. You've got your sacrificial cultists here. You've got your normal lurking cultists. Ideally, I would hand off these original designs off to an actual 3D artist who could make higher resolution miniatures at this scale. But this is not far from what I'm going for. This is pretty close. Here is the mage hero. He's got a little magic staff and he's carrying his little spell book. You get the gist. And then once again, you can see that, a giant monster in my world is really not much larger than a normal size Space Marine, but it still reads as giant compared to these tiny minis. This is what I work on when I'm in a funk and when I just can't bring myself to work on rules writing and I just need to scratch the crafting itch. I just open up Lightwave, do some quick modeling, get out my 3D printer and just have some fun with printing and painting. And it kind of gets me re-inspired. And then I get back into the rule book and have another big session with the rule book. I think I'm getting close with all the final revisions. I do think I need a couple more weeks to finish, the rule book and do the quest book edits and finish up the monster card rewrites. And I want to do one final round of testing, of course, after I make all these changes, because the changes are huge, but I think the game is going to be easier to learn, easier to play, but still retain the depth of play, which is really what I'm going for with this revision cycle. I'll print up a few more copies, I'll get some more beta test feedback, and then hopefully final release in August within the next 4 to 5 weeks. So fingers crossed. Getting close.